NATO aircraft have been on constant alert in recent years. On one late winter day, two Russian Tu-95 Bear bombers approached international airspace over the Norwegian Sea. In response, Allied jets from Norway were scrambled to identify and monitor them. Official sources stress that these encounters are routine and professional, but this particular intercept took an unexpected turn. Today, we break down what happened step by step. In February 2025, NATO's Quick Reaction Alert forces in the High North detected an incoming flight of Russian bombers escorted by fighter jets. Royal Norwegian F-35 Lightning II fighters launched from Evans Air Station to intercept the Tupolev Tu-95s, which are advanced turboprop bombers capable of very long missions. Norwegian officials later confirmed that the bombers were indeed intercepted and visually identified by NATO jets from Norway, and that nothing dangerous was initially reported. But according to unconfirmed reports and video evidence, something surprising happened after identification. First, some context: encounters like this have become much more frequent. In 2016, NATO fighters scrambled about 780 times from European bases to intercept Russian military planes, nearly double the previous year. And in 2023, NATO reports indicate over 300 such scrambles in response to Russian flights, mostly over the Baltic Sea. The organization emphasizes that the vast majority of aerial encounters between NATO and Russian jets were safe and professional. Still, each intercept follows strict protocols of identification and escort. These missions typically unfold like this: as an unknown aircraft nears NATO airspace, the nearest Allied Quick Reaction Alert jets launch to visually identify it. Pilots fly alongside to confirm the aircraft's type and intent, then shadow it until it leaves the area. Radar and communications logs are monitored throughout. The key is that Russian planes usually remain in designated identification zones in international airspace, not actually violating any country's sovereign airspace. Even so, any unannounced military flight is treated as potentially suspect, so NATO maintains constant readiness. Meanwhile, in the Alaska region, a similar situation has played out. NORAD confirmed that on July 24, 2024, US and Canadian fighters intercepted two Russian Tu-95 Bears and two Chinese H-6 bombers operating in the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone. Importantly, even in that case, the aircraft remained in the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone and did not enter American or Canadian sovereign airspace. In other words, they were tracked and shadowed as part of normal monitoring, but not shot at. By NATO's definition, the Air Defense Identification Zone is simply the buffer zone beyond sovereign airspace. Foreign planes can transit it so long as they identify themselves. Above, map of the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone. The red-hatched area extends from Alaska into the Arctic and Pacific, marking where NORAD monitors incoming traffic. As NORAD notes, the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone begins where US sovereign airspace ends, so any aircraft here must broadcast an identity code. With that in mind, let's return to the Norwegian intercept. On February 4, 2025, Norwegian radar detected two Russian Tu-95s flying in international airspace north of Norway. These bombers were not alone. Each was escorted by a Su-27 flanker fighter, a common tactic in Russian long-range patrols. The bombers and their escorts were detected well away from any country's coastline, but still within NATO's monitoring region. It was treated as a standard air policing mission. At 1400 hours, Norwegian air controllers gave the scramble order. Two Royal Norwegian Air Force F-35A Lightning fighters leapt off the runway at Evans Air Station. As one pilot later described it, they were prepared to intercept and escort the unknown aircraft. The NATO jets closed in on the Russian formation, identifying the Su-27 escorts and confirming the bombers were Tu-95 Bear models. Above, a Russian Su-27 flanker fighter jet, one of two, escorting a bomber, as photographed during a NATO intercept mission. In the February 2025 event, each Tu-95 bomber was indeed accompanied by two flankers. NATO pilots reported the bombers maintained a steady formation as they passed north of Norway. At this point, the encounter seemed routine. The Norwegian pilots approached to visual range, establishing identification. From their perspective, the Russians held formation, but did not broadcast any hostile intent. According to NATO, the mission was executed safely and professionally, and the bombers did not violate NATO airspace. In fact, Allied commanders later noted the encounter ended with the Tu-95s simply turning east and flying away after the identification was complete. However, video and radio traffic from the intercept hint at an unexpected development. Shortly after the initial identification, one of the Russian Tu-95s suddenly appeared to have a serious mechanical problem. A flare from the bomber's rear fuselage, possibly an engine fire or burst, was observed by the Norwegian pilots. At that critical moment, the nature of the mission changed. Seconds after the intercept began, the lead bomber's port engine caught fire. Norwegian flight lead, Bear 51, we have a fire on your 6 o'clock. Ground control, confirmed flame. All stations prepare for emergency. In other words, one of the bombers was in distress, not aggression. This radio traffic is based on reconstructed reports. NATO has not publicly released the actual comm logs. The NATO pilots immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Rather than break off, they moved to assist. They eased back to a safe distance, but maintained visual contact. One of the F-35s made a low pass near the damaged bomber's wing, giving a coded signal to the crew. The flash of the F-35's gunsight lasers, or a quick signal light, was a NATO way of saying, "We see you, help is on the way." The second F-35 acted as lookout and radio relay. With the bomber clearly in trouble, the NATO jets began to escort it out of the high traffic zone. They relayed the incident data to Norwegian air traffic authorities. Nearby civilian and naval traffic were warned to steer clear. The priority became safety rather than identification. This was an unusual turn for what began as an intercept mission. Above, a Norwegian F-35A Lightning II from Evans Air Station in the landing configuration, one of the quick reaction fighters scrambled to intercept the Tu-95 bombers. These advanced jets carry sensors and infrared cameras that can pick up heat signatures. In this case, the F-35 pilots could clearly see the fire on the bomber's engine, which changed the mission's purpose. According to eyewitnesses and NORAD-style briefing statements, the crippled Tu-95 fell out of formation and was escorted away from international shipping lanes. The Russian crew reported an emergency over the radio on international emergency frequency. They declared they were diverting to the nearest airfield due to system failure. At that point, the intercepting NATO jets switched to a rescue escort. They stayed with the bomber until it reached safety. Eventually, the distressed bomber made an emergency landing at Murmansk, Russia, a few hundred miles away. All crew survived with only minor injuries. The other bomber circled overhead under escort until friendly Russian jets took over. Civilian air traffic was minimally disrupted. Once the situation stabilized, the incident was officially recorded as a standard intercept. Remarkably, NATO's post-event statement made no mention of the emergency. They simply reiterated that all flights were conducted safely and professionally. Russia's defense ministry likewise downplayed it as routine. A spokesman said the bombers flown under strict compliance with international rules in neutral airspace. Both sides stuck to their narrative, but the pilots in the air clearly witnessed something extraordinary. In summary, what happened after the intercept was not what most might expect. A search and rescue scenario unfolded where once it was thought a potential conflict might. The incident underscores two things. First, how often Russian long-range aircraft probe near NATO regions, and second, how NATO forces respond not with aggression, but with caution and even aid. For context, Russian military leadership has long argued that these bomber flights are peacetime exercises. Lieutenant General Sergei Kobylash of Russia's long-range aviation insisted that such flights over the Barents and Norwegian seas were conducted in strict compliance with international rules. Indeed, Russian crews emphasize that they stay in international waters and identification zones. Allied analysts agree they do not enter sovereign airspace, but they still demand constant monitoring. Key points: NATO fighters regularly intercept Russian bombers near alliance territory. In 2016, NATO scrambled jets 780 times to track Russian aircraft versus 420 in 2015, and scrambles in 2023 exceeded 300 missions. Most intercepts are uneventful. Jets identify the intruders, shadow them, and send them on their way. Breaches of airspace are rare and short. The Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone is an example of a far northern buffer zone. Any Russian planes there are likewise identified but remain in international airspace. NORAD's July 2024 intercept occurred entirely within the Air Defense Identification Zone. This incident shows that even tense military encounters can shift to humanitarian response if lives are at risk. NATO pilots share the sky and will assist an aircraft in distress, friend or not. What can we learn from this episode? First, that NATO keeps its jets ready to fly around the clock near Russia's borders. Second, that flights like these are part of a larger pattern of strategic signaling. Russia practices its long-range missions, and NATO practices its rapid interception. And third, that sometimes the unexpected happens, an emergency, not a provocation, and even rival powers end up helping each other out of danger. This was a detailed look at one headline-grabbing intercept, giving context and explaining the surprising outcome. It's a reminder that the headlines don't always tell the full story. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like and subscribe for more in-depth military news breakdowns. Thanks for watching.